The wind screamed outside the tall glass walls of my father's sleek lakeside estate in New Hampshire, rattling the frames as if nature itself was mirroring the tension that gripped the dining room. Inside, the silence was brittle, waiting to shatter. "Congratulations, Tyler," my father. Richard Whitman said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He pushed a thick envelope across the polished walnut table toward my younger brother, his tone calm, but smug. "You've earned it." I stared at that envelope like it was a guillotine. Inside it held everything: ownership of the villa, the family business, even the offshore accounts we'd never spoken about openly, but all knew existed. All of it was his now. Tyler's fingers wrapped around the envelope, but he didn't look at me. His lips were pressed into a firm line, and his eyes stayed glued to the table like the weight of guilt might meet my gaze if he dared lift them. I sat there 34 years old, but in that moment I felt like a 10-year-old girl being scolded in the principal's office. My palms were clammy, resting stiffly on my navy slacks, and my heart thudded against my ribs like a warning drum. Across from me, my stepmother Diana toyed nervously with her necklace fingers, brushing over the diamonds like they might shield her from what was happening. She didn't say a word, just stared blankly at the mahogany floorboards. Then my father turned to me. "And you, Claire," he said with a sneer, his voice sharp like a blade. "You've always been the dreamer, soft, too damn compassionate to survive in the real world." My stomach dropped as if the ground beneath my chair had vanished. There were only 5 of us in the room: him, Tyler, Diana, the attorney, and me, but I felt utterly alone, as if I'd been shoved outside and left in the cold. He gestured briskly to the lawyer, a graying man in a neat blue suit. "Let's move forward. Get the documents signed." "Dad," I choked, my voice cracking with emotion, "please don't do this." He sighed and rolled his eyes like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Spare me the melodrama, Claire. You made your choice. You wanted to go find meaning. Remember." He lifted his hands, mimicking air quotes with a mocking flair. "You abandoned your family to play savior in some rundown health clinic halfway across the world. And for what? No title, no money, just wasted years. You never asked why I left," I whispered, barely audible. "You never cared." "And I still don't," he snapped, leaning forward with a scowl. "Tyler stayed. Tyler showed loyalty. He gave this family what it needed." "He showed you what you wanted to see," I said, trying to stay calm, my voice trembling but firm. "But he's been lying to you." My father laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the stone fireplace. "That's just jealousy talking." The lawyer, Mr. Charles Halpern, shifted awkwardly beside him. His fingers tightened around the leather-bound folder he had been holding since we sat down. "Actually," he said, clearing his throat before anyone signs anything, "there's a matter we need to address." My father scowled. "What matter?" Mr. Halpern's eyes met his without flinching. "There's a sealed amendment to the will. It was filed 6 years ago, requested by your late mother, Eleanor Whitman." My heart stopped. Grandma. The only person who had ever truly seen me for who I was, who used to whisper that strength didn't always roar, it could be found in the quietest voices. My chest tightened. "What amendment?" My father snapped, his irritation rising like smoke. Mr. Halpern calmly set his folder on the table and opened it. He pulled out a yellowed document, crisp and clean, its edges sharp. "This was recorded during your mother's final notary appointment. She made it very clear. This amendment was to remain sealed unless you ever attempted to cut Claire out of the inheritance." My father's jaw tightened. His face twitched with disbelief. "That's nonsense. She had no legal authority." "She did," Mr. Halpern replied more firmly now. "Eleanor maintained 51% ownership of Whitman Industries until her death. You never contested it. That gives her the full legal right to enact this amendment." Tyler shifted uneasily in his chair, finally acknowledging that something bigger than he'd anticipated was unfolding. Diana froze, her hand resting on the diamond pendant she always wore to board meetings, the one that made her feel powerful. Mr. Halpern turned to me. "Miss Claire, would you prefer to read it yourself, or shall I?" I didn't move. My eyes locked on the envelope in Tyler's hand, the one my father had passed to him like it was a crown. Everything he believed he still controlled was inside that envelope. "Read it," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Mr. Halpern unfolded the paper and began. "In the event that my granddaughter Claire Whitman is deemed unworthy by her father, I hereby grant her full authority over my share of Whitman Industries, effective immediately. All voting rights and decision-making privileges shall be transferred to her name upon activation of this clause. This document overrides all prior agreements regarding ownership or leadership within the family business or estate. The room went deathly quiet. Only the rhythmic tap of rain against the windows remained softer now, almost reverent, as if even the storm outside was waiting to see what would happen next. "What the hell does that mean?" my father barked. "It means," Mr. Halpern said, turning fully toward me, "that your daughter is now the majority shareholder. Legally, nothing you sign today can override her authority." My father shoved his chair back with a loud screech and jumped to his feet. "This is insane. She doesn't even understand the business." "Maybe not your version of it," I replied, standing as well, keeping my voice calm. "But I know how to lead without fear, how to build without destroying, how to protect what matters." I stepped forward, no longer shaking. "You called me useless, but I never needed your validation." I turned to Mr. Halpern. "Let's proceed. We've got a company to run." Tyler stared down at the polished table, his knuckles white. Diana opened her mouth to say something, but closed it again, lips trembling. My father didn't sit back down. He just stood there, staring as the empire he believed would always be his began to slip through his fingers like sand. If you felt it, the subtle but seismic shift when the power returned to its rightful place, then you already know this story is far from over. And if you've come this far with me, I hope you'll stay. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because what unfolds next will render even the most unshakable voices speechless. My father did not utter a word. He simply stood there as if rooted to the polished oak beneath his feet, his spine stiff, his mouth a thin bloodless line. The air around him crackled with tension, and though no words were spoken, the atmosphere pulsed with the quiet fury of a storm-denied thunder. The chair he had violently shoved backward now stood at a jagged angle, forgotten in the wake of his disbelief. And for the first time in my life, through the steel jaw, the clenched fists, the twitching temple, I saw something unfamiliar in my father's eyes. Fear, but not the explosive, blustering kind that often erupted from him in moments of challenge. No, this was different. It was the fear that seeps in through the cracks of certainty, the kind that settles deep into the bones when one realizes that something they thought was immovable has begun to slip beyond their grasp. "Please," I said, my voice gentler than I expected, almost tentative. "Sit." I didn't say it to humiliate him, or to assert my new authority. I said it because I knew what I had truly longed for all these years wasn't retribution. It was recognition. I had never needed to dominate him. I had only wanted the dignity he had denied me for so long, and yet he didn't move. His pride, once an iron fortress, had begun to crumble, but still he held fast to its walls. It was Tyler who finally broke the silence. "This isn't right," he muttered, voice tight with disbelief, scanning the room for some form of reinforcement. "She left," he said louder, his words sharp, defiant. "She didn't want this. She went off to save the world or something. I built homes for women escaping violence." I said each word precise, my tone calm but pointed. "I helped fund transitional housing for veterans returning to lives they no longer recognized. I didn't run away, Tyler. I ran towards something that mattered." He gave a dismissive snort, but it couldn't mask the flicker of unease behind his eyes. "Yeah, sure. That's nice and all," he said, "but you don't know the first thing about running Whitman Industries." "I know enough," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Enough to know that you've been siphoning company funds through a shell corporation. One registered under your old college roommate's name, if I'm not mistaken." Tyler paled visibly. Diana gasped, her hand flying to her chest, clutching the necklace like it could somehow hold the moment together. "Claire," she whispered, "stop. This is family." "Was it?" My voice broke slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of unspoken history. "Was it family when you stood silent while he called me a failure, when he handed over everything to Tyler without so much as a nod to the sacrifices I made for all of you?" Diana didn't respond. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked suddenly small. "No," I said more softly now. "You all made it clear I was never meant to belong here. But Grandma thought otherwise." Mr. Halpern cleared his throat. "Miss Claire," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "your grandmother didn't just leave you her shares. She left something else. Something meant to be given to you only after this moment." He opened his briefcase and carefully retrieved a small time-worn box, the kind that seemed to carry history in every faded corner. He placed it in front of me with a quiet reverence. Inside lay a gold-plated compass, aged and gleaming with purpose. Beneath it, folded with care, was a letter addressed to me in her delicate looping script. My fingers trembled as I opened it. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, it means your father has done exactly what I feared. Don't hate him. He's a product of a world that taught him strength must roar. But you, child, were never weak. You were the quiet strength that held us together even when the rest of us didn't see it. This compass is yours now, because I trust that wherever you go, you'll find the right path, not just for yourself, but for others too. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I blinked hard and looked up at Mr. Halpern. Let's proceed, I said. As I signed the document affirming my control over the company, my father finally spoke, his voice low and bitter. You think this makes you powerful, he asked. You think she did this out of love? She gave it to you to spite me? I turned to him, really looked at him not as a daughter desperate for approval, but as a woman who no longer needed it. No, I said calmly. She did it because she believed in me, and because she knew I would use this power to build something, not destroy it. And I walked away, my heels echoing against the floor like punctuation marks to a sentence long overdue. Each step peeled away a layer of rejection, as though the weight of his dismissal was finally lifting from my shoulders. But peace did not greet me on the other side of that door. It was war. I had barely stepped into the corridor when I heard the familiar cadence of footsteps behind me. Claire Tyler called out, his voice smooth, but his tone laced with calculation. I turned slowly, bracing myself. You don't have to do this, he said. Do what, push me out. That's what comes next, right? He gave a half shrug like the answer didn't matter. I haven't made a move, I replied quietly but firmly. I simply stood up. He let out a dry laugh. You really think signing a few documents makes you ready to lead? You don't have the backbone? My heart thudded hard, but I held my ground. I'm not here to prove anything to you, Tyler. I'm here to lead with integrity. Something this family seemed to have forgotten. He stepped closer, too close. 2 months, he hissed. You'll be crawling back in 2 months. This company isn't a battlefield, he added coldly. It's not a charity. No, I said, lifting my chin. It's a platform, and I'll use it to uplift, not exploit. You're naive, he muttered, already turning to walk away. But the tension in his shoulders, the fists clenched at his sides, they told another story. This wasn't surrender. It was a warning. The next few days unfolded like slow-moving thunderclouds. Word spread quickly. Claire Whitman had returned not as the black sheep, but as the new matriarch of a legacy she was never supposed to inherit. Whispers echoed through halls and conference rooms like the rustle of unseen pages turning. Some whispered with hope, others with fear. But I didn't fire anyone. I didn't throw down mandates. I didn't host flashy strategy meetings. I listened. And what I heard chilled me. Departments were siloed into factions. Promotions were not earned but bestowed like favors. Burnout was rampant, complaints buried. It wasn't a company. It was a kingdom. And Tyler had learned from the king. One afternoon, I stepped into the employee break room, and conversation died instantly. The silence was a sharp contrast to the murmured gossip I'd overheard just moments earlier in the corridor. Please, I said, holding up a hand. You're on break. Sit, eat. A janitor, Martha Jennings, stood slowly cautious, her brow furrowed in uncertainty. We weren't allowed to sit when Mr. Tyler walked in. I paused, absorbing the weight of those words. Well, I said gently, but with resolve that changes today. Her expression softened the lines in her face, easing as she looked at me, not as a CEO, but as a fellow human weathering the same storm. That night, Martha said gently, her voice a hush against the fluorescent hum of my office. I stayed late. I couldn't sleep, so I combed through the reports. Her eyes dropped to her hands, fingers knotted together. I found 3 budgets that didn't add up, a supplier contract that felt off, and a termination list, people who'd raised red flags and were promptly cut loose. A chill settled into my spine. This wasn't negligence. It was something darker. This wasn't mismanagement. It was rot. And if I didn't act swiftly, if I allowed it to continue unchecked, the collapse wouldn't just stain my leadership, it would define it. I would become the scapegoat for a legacy already teetering. The next morning, Tyler barged into my office, fury boiling off him in waves. His suit jacket was wrinkled tie, slightly askew, like he had dressed in haste but not without venom. In his hand, a manila folder thudded onto my desk. You wanted the CEO seat, he spat, his voice sharpened by contempt. Let's see if you survive this. He leaned in his shadow, stretching long across the grain of my desk. Inside the folder, screenshots, emails, even photographs. Each one meticulously arranged to fabricate a narrative, all of them damning. "These are fake," I said flatly, flipping through the pages, though my stomach turned with every accusation. "Can you prove it?" he asked, his smirk slick and cruel. "You want to take me down, I want what's mine. You were never supposed to win." I rose slowly, not with defiance, but with resolve. "I'm not trying to win, Tyler. I'm trying to fix what's broken. You see power, and all I see is rot." He snorted. "You see weakness." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door ajar like an omen. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about sibling rivalry. It was war. But unlike him, I had something far more powerful than ambition. I had the truth. Within 2 days, the headlines detonated across every newsfeed. New CEO embroiled in charity fraud. Family feud erupts inside Whitman Industries. Claire Whitman visionary or disaster. It didn't matter that it was fabricated. The public didn't pause for facts. My inbox howled with PR alarms. My phone became a furnace. I kept telling myself to stay calm. But that night, long after the lights dimmed and the building hushed, I broke. No outburst, no sobbing spectacle, just a silent unraveling on the office couch, curled inward, grief folded around me like a shroud. I didn't cry because I was being slandered. I cried because just maybe my father had been right. Maybe I wasn't meant to hold this. A knock so soft it almost didn't exist stirred me. I wiped my face, blinked quickly. The door creaked open. Martha stepped in holding a paper cup. "Thought you could use this," she said. My voice cracked. "You didn't have to." She set the cup down gently. "You looked like someone needed to. No one ever brought me anything when I cried in this room. I figured someone should break that cycle." Something loosened in me, not in pain but in recognition. "Thank you," I whispered. She took the chair across from me. "Miss Claire," she said softly, "do you want to know the truth about your family?" I looked up, guarded. She nodded. "I've worked here for 28 years. I've seen what most people pretend not to. And I've seen what they try to bury. You always looked me in the eye." I couldn't speak, my throat locked. "You might feel alone now," she said, her voice steady. "But you've got something they'll never understand, loyalty that wasn't bought. Loyalty earned through kindness." I blinked, holding back more tears. "Why are you helping me?" Her smile was small, tired. "Because someone once helped me when no one else did. And because this company doesn't need another king. It needs a healer." The next morning I entered the boardroom with a stillness that came from the eye of a storm. I let them speak first. Accusations, sneers, threats, even a lawsuit. I listened. Then I stood. "If anyone here can prove the validity of those documents," I said, my voice unwavering, "I'll resign today." I dropped the original reports on the table, proof of Tyler's misconduct. Hush money payments, financial manipulations. Then I turned on the projector. The footage rolled. Tyler entering a secure office, plugging in a USB drive, transferring files. The timestamp aligned with the supposed creation of the forged evidence. Silence reigned. "Truth matters," I said. But I didn't come here to destroy my brother. I came to repair what he damaged. My grandmother chose me not because I'm flawless, but because I still believe in people. Even the ones who try to break me. I turned to the company's attorney. "I'm not pressing charges, but Tyler is suspended effective immediately. An internal investigation will proceed." Shock hung in the room like fog. Then from the end of the table, Mr. Halpern, a retired board member, rose. "I misjudged you," he said. "Thought you were just another idealist. But today you reminded me why this company mattered. It was never about control. It was about people." The room exhaled. Tyler never came back. 2 days later, a letter arrived, his handwriting familiar but weary. "Claire, I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't just want power, I wanted to be seen. I always thought you got the love I didn't. Maybe you just earned it differently." I folded it and placed it beside my grandmother's compass. Not all endings come with fire. Some arrive with grace. The office changed, not quieter, more awake. A month passed. The media retracted their lies. People called it luck. But the ones who mattered saw the truth. Not because I shouted, because I held the line. One name, though, remained absent. My father. No calls, no letters, nothing. Until one Sunday morning. I opened my office door and there he was, sitting across from my desk, hands folded, eyes dull. "I had to see it," he said. See what? That you didn't burn it down. He looked smaller, older. Not the man of steel I remembered, but a man who had lost something that once defined him. You were right, he said, voice barely above a whisper. About me, about Tyler, about what we turned this place into. I watched him unsure. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photo me 12 years old paint on my hands, my grandmother laughing beside me. She said you'd change this family, he murmured. I just didn't want to believe her. If I did, I said gently, it's only because she believed in me. He nodded slowly. I came to say something, he said, voice shaking. Something I should have said a long time ago. He met my eyes. I'm sorry, Claire, for everything. Part of me wanted to tell him it was too late. But healing doesn't start with punishment. It begins when someone chooses to stop the cycle. So I nodded, thank you. He hesitated. I just needed to say it before I ran out of time. Then don't, I replied softly. Fix what you can. It's not too late. He didn't answer. Just held my gaze one last time, then slipped out the door like a shadow leaving the room. 2 weeks later, Martha stepped quietly into my office, her presence as composed and calm as ever, a folder cradled in her arms. I looked up from my desk where the ink was still drying on the last round of personnel decisions. What's this? I asked, already sensing from the solemnity in her eyes that it carried weight. She placed it on the desk in front of me with care. A list, she said softly, of every employee your father let go for speaking up. I thought you might want to see it. I opened the folder, the paper whispering like old secrets as I turned each page. Names stared back at me, each one a story, a livelihood, a voice that had once tried to do the right thing and paid the price for it. My chest tightened. Some I remembered, some I didn't, but they all deserved to be remembered. Without hesitation, we sent out letters personal, thoughtful, and direct. Each one was an invitation to return to be part of the company again. No interrogations, no explanations required. It wasn't about redemption, not for me. It was about rewriting what legacy meant. Because legacy, I'd learned, wasn't etched in surnames or stitched into empires. It lived in the spaces we left behind and how people felt once we exited the room. Months passed. The company didn't evolve into a gleaming palace of innovation overnight. It didn't need to. It grew warmer, more human. The walls echoed less with fear and more with laughter. Doors that had once remained shut now stood ajar. Ryan never returned to the company, but we met once in a quiet corner cafe on a rainy Thursday afternoon. No apologies were exchanged, no wounds were reopened. We talked like two people who had once shared a childhood, and now simply tried to understand each other across the jagged bridge of adulthood. Maybe that was enough. My father, however, kept his distance, a silence that once would have felt like exile, now felt like peace. Until one day, without fanfare, I received a receipt. A 7-figure donation had been made in my name to the women's shelter where I once served, hidden from his world and title. There was no note, no signature, just the quiet punctuation of an old man trying in his own way to mend something. And that was enough, because I hadn't come for revenge. What I found instead was something stronger, more enduring. I had earned respect. I had found peace. And I had carved out a future that no one could strip away. Now, when I step into that boardroom, I don't hear whispers behind my back. I hear footsteps steady, assured of people who believe in me. All of it born from a single moment when someone once said I was nothing. And instead of breaking, I rose not by mimicking their cruelty, but by honoring my truth. If something in this story echoed inside you, if it reached some buried part of your own experience, I hope you'll share it with me. Leave a comment below. Tell me what moment resonated, or what you would have done in my place. I read every word, not because I seek praise, but because this journey was always about connection. And if you too have been underestimated or dismissed, know this: you don't need to raise your voice to make them listen. You only need to stand unwavering in who you are. Like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe in healing that stems from strength, and strength that is shaped by kindness. Because sometimes it's the quietest souls who carry the legacies that echo the loudest.